I stopped checking the ambulance bay door every time it opened months ago, so I don't know why I looked up that particular Wednesday, except that the wind chimes someone had hung by the intake window were making a sound like a question nobody had answered yet. Hey, Wren. I nearly dropped the clipboard. Grant Delaney. Standing there in a grey jacket instead of a hospital gown, on his own 2 feet, no monitor trailing behind him, no IV pole, none of the machinery that used to be the only reason I ever saw his face. For a second, my brain simply refused to reconcile the 2 versions of him. The man who'd coded on my table back in December, blue-lipped and terrified, and this one, tan from what looked like actual summer, holding 2 coffees like an offering. "You're not supposed to be here," I said, which was a strange thing to say to a man who wasn't a patient anymore. But 8 months of protocol doesn't just switch off because someone changes clothes. "I'm not here as a patient." He held out one of the coffees. I checked. Asked the charge nurse if there's a rule against a guy saying thank you to the person who kept him alive. She said the rule's actually about 6 months out from discharge. I waited 8. Figured that was safe enough. I laughed before I meant to, this short, surprised sound, because of course he'd asked. Of course he'd found the exact loophole and then blown past it out of caution. That was Grant. I remembered that about him even through the fog of that terrible December. The way he used to apologize to the nurses for bothering them even while his heart was trying to quit on him. I want to tell you I took the coffee gracefully. I didn't. I stood there in the bay doorway holding my clipboard like a shield, running the math on all the reasons this was complicated, while some other, quieter part of me was just glad, plain glad, that he was standing upright and breathing in here. "How's the heart?" I asked, because it was easier than asking how's everything else, meaning how's the part of you I don't have a chart for. "Strong, boring, even. Cardiologist says I graduated to check-ins twice a year." He shifted his weight. "I think about that hallway a lot, though. 3 in the morning, you telling me to breathe with you because I wouldn't stop panicking about the monitor beeping. You probably don't remember that part. I remembered every part. I remembered the sound the crash cart makes on tile, and I remembered his hand gripping mine so hard I had a bruise the next day that I told my roommate came from lifting a patient wrong. I remembered thinking, somewhere underneath the adrenaline, that I hoped he made it not just because that was my job, but because I wanted to know what he sounded like when he wasn't scared. "I remember," I said. "I wrote you a card. Back in January." He looked almost embarrassed saying it. Never sent it. Kept thinking it'd be weird, a patient writing his nurse a letter that wasn't just thank you for saving my life. And then enough time passed that showing up felt weirder than the letter would have been, so he shrugged. "Here I am. Weird." There's a particular kind of ache that comes from being needed by someone in the worst hour of their life and then never seeing them again once they're well. You patch people up and send them back into a world that doesn't include you, and you tell yourself that's the whole point, that letting go clean is the job done right. I'd made peace with that a long time ago, or thought I had, right up until a man was standing in my parking lot holding coffee and admitting he'd carried something for 8 months rather than let it go the easy way. "You could have just called," I said. "Would you have picked up?" Genuinely asking. I opened my mouth to say something reflexive and honest died right there. Because the truth was I might not have. A voice on the phone is easy to explain away as gratitude, easy to file under closure. A man standing in front of you holding 2 coffees, having waited out an entire calendar of caution to make sure he wasn't crossing a line that didn't exist for him anymore. That's harder to file anywhere except exactly what it was. "Probably not," I admitted. "I'm not great at letting people be more than their diagnosis once I've discharged them. Feels like cheating, almost. Like I only know the version of you that was scared. So get to know the other version," he said. Simple as that, like it wasn't asking for anything enormous. "I'm not asking you to skip a shift. I know you've got 20 minutes before you're back on the floor," Denise told me. Apparently she's very free with information at the front desk. I just wanted 5 of those minutes. The rest is up to you. I thought about all the discharge summaries I'd written that year, all the goodbyes dressed up as instructions. Take this medication, follow up with your doctor, call if anything changes. And how none of them ever had a line for what to do if the patient came back, not because something was wrong, but because something, finally, might be right. There's no protocol for that. No box to check. I took the coffee. It was still warm, and he'd remembered, somehow, that I took it with too much cream, the way I'd complained about the break room coffee 1:03 a.m. shift when I didn't think he was really listening, half out of it on pain medication and fear. 5 minutes, I said. Then I have a floor full of people who actually are patients. He smiled like I'd handed him something. 5 minutes. I'll take it. We sat on the concrete ledge by the ambulance bay, 2 coffees between us and the wind chimes going, and he told me about the 20 pounds he'd gained back, about learning to walk without listening for his own heartbeat every 10 steps, about a job that let him work from anywhere, which was how he'd ended up back in this city that wasn't really his, just to see if a 5-minute conversation might turn into something longer. I told him things I don't usually tell people I've discharged, that nights get long, that I sometimes wonder what happens to everyone after they leave, that I'd thought about him more than the chart ever required. When my pager buzzed, I stood up too fast, coffee sloshing, and he stood too, unhurried, like he had all the time now that he hadn't had in December. "Can I come back?" he asked. Not as a patient, just as a guy who drinks bad hospital coffee and likes bad hospital company. I looked at him. Really looked, the way I hadn't let myself in December when looking too long at a frightened patient felt like a line you didn't cross. And for the first time all year, the ambulance bay doors sounded less like an alarm and more like an invitation. "Wednesdays," I said. "I get a real break on Wednesdays." He was still standing there when the doors slid shut behind me, and I caught myself smiling at my own reflection in the glass, thinking that maybe letting go clean isn't always the same as letting go for good. Sometimes it's just leaving the door unlocked long enough for someone to decide, on his own, to walk back through it.